That's one scene of a few that we saw play out in Ablekuma North. But then again, this has led to a number of institutions reacting. And you heard the Interior Minister, Muntaka Mubarak, indicate, Alhaji Mohammed Muntaka Mubarak, indicate that these videos have been given to the IGP to review and then also identify persons who would have to be prosecuted if established wrongdoing, indeed, in all of these videos that we've been showing over the period. But the Institute for Democratic Governance, IDEC Civil Forum Initiative, issued a statement earlier today. The Coalition of Domestic Election Observers, Kumadoe, also issued a statement earlier today. We're going to review the portions of that statement shortly, and we'll bring in two people who will be speaking on this. But this is the IDEC statement. We're going to put on the screen. It says, electoral violence occurred during the parliamentary. We do know that. Pattern of impunity is growing, with similar violent incidents recorded in 2019, Ayawaso West Wuogon by-election, and 2020 and 2024 general elections. Now, the specific reference to the 2020 and 2024 general elections by this IDEC statement, and I'm going to go there in a bit, so stay with me. Now, they also talk about failure to prosecute perpetrators has led to a culture of reprisal, attacks, and lawlessness around elections in this country. They're calling for arrest and prosecution of those responsible for Ablekuma North violence. The National Elections Security Task Force should adopt a more proactive and preventive approach ahead of the Akwatia by-election. Civil society urged to engage major political parties to break the cycle, and these engagements have been going on for quite a while, by the way. Now, institutional and constitutional reforms needed to address recurring electoral violence and restoration of public confidence. Talk about the media and police collaboration as well, to essential for accountability and peaceful elections. And then also we have the Kumadoe statement. They also corroborate a number of the things that IDEC captured. Incidents of violence and vote buying marred the Ablekuma North elections, intimidation and assaults targeted poll workers, voters, journalists, and two female politicians. Security failures were evident despite heavy police presence, allowing unauthorized and suspicious individuals to intimidate voters. A journalist was assaulted, and although the police interdicted the officer involved, broader action is needed. And the political parties, they mentioned MPP and NDC used inflammatory and provocative language following the incident, worsening tension. Police in action at St. Peter's Society Polling Station in Odoko allowed thugs to invade. And then also they criticized the emasculation of the Ghana Police Service, calling it a threat to democracy. And that is why I bring in Richard Kumadoe, security analyst. And this particular point, Mr. Kumadoe, that Kumadoe raises is also in tandem with what IDEC raised earlier. They talk about the emasculation of the Ghana Police Service. They say it's a threat to our democracy. I mean, do you support this particular position? And if so, what has to be done to address this?
Definitely there. I have been on the field with officers of Kumadoe for all these years. I think as a nation, we have not come to terms with what we wanted to do and what we need to do and how we want to do it. So it has always been about a knee-jerk reaction. We move from one state to the other, which we put in processes that do not necessarily resolve the critical issues that we face when it comes to our elections and how violent they have become, and in direct relation to the role of politicians and the role of law enforcement agencies and the general population that has a mandate to vote in some of these elections. After, if you take all the violence we have seen in our elections, mostly it's the politicians that create the problem. And they bastardize the process and create all manner of problems. Unfortunately, the blame goes to the security agencies. And people have not asked, or people have not really participated when it comes to law enforcement roles and functionalities when it comes to elections. What do they want the police to do, and how do they want their actions to be performed? You have police stations that do not support proactive and preventive approach of people getting involved into the inner perimeters. You have coalition centers that are poorly structured, and you have been doing elections since 1992. You are busy going to review the Constitution that will take some level of powers away from the executives and the governance systems of this country in a more transparent manner, in a way that creates flexibility for everybody. But nobody has thought about building new police stations and new coalition centers. And if you have been a law enforcement officer like some of us have been for the past 29 years, you can really see the difficulties we face as law enforcement officers in controlling the basic things we need to do when it comes to elections, and how violent politicians have become, and how they always want to bastardize the process and blame everybody apart from themselves.
Right.
So to some extent, yeah, I read the grammar, but largely, I felt if you speak to practitioners in the field, you will understand some of the difficulties we face when it comes to dealing with some of these elections and the hiccups we have faced over the years.
I see. And stay with me, Mr. Kumadoe. We can bring in Madam Angela Dramana Abuaji. She is the Executive Director of the Civic Forum Initiative that is also working in tandem with the Institute for Democratic Governance, IDEG. In fact, Civic Forum Initiative and IDEG jointly issued this statement, which we went through earlier, and she's joined me on Zoom as well. Appreciate you, madam. Thank you for joining us. I mean, you're calling for effective action that needs to be taken urgently. And from where you sit and reviewing the details of this statement you've issued, what effective action can and should be implemented or taken urgently to address this cycle of electoral violence that we've seen almost become a normalized abnormality in our election cycle in this country?
I think beyond effective action is more strategic action. So for, the immediate thing, I would think that the National Security Task Force needs to look at its SOPs again, the way in which they engage with the public when supervising elections like this, or, making sure that they are providing the security for elections. I mean, I remember that the former IGP Dampare had a particular approach because he didn't want anybody to die needlessly because of elections, and sort of didn't have his men, the police officers, having guns or anything with them, but just to engage the crowd. But where there are clear vigilante action, you can't just say you want to engage the crowd when they are coming at you forcefully. And that's what we saw. So the first thing is to review their SOPs, the way in which they engage immediately, because Akwatia is coming up, we've all said that. And then more strategically, the nation needs to think about how to implement the Anti-Vigilantism Act, but not only that, to augment security and education in elections in such a way that citizens' action will stop vigilantism, even if it's not without force.
Stay with me, Madam Abaji, and Mr. Kumadoe, on that point about the electoral cycle and what we have seen over the period, you would agree with this portion of the IDEC statement that the lack or the failure to prosecute the perpetrators, right, of past election-related violence has also fueled the culture of reprisal attacks and, the impunity that we're seeing at the moment, is it not?
Definitely. And Alfred, I have made this point for the past 10, 15 years, you know me, that, non-punishable of offenses will always rationalize bad behavior and promote antisocial tendencies in society. And that is what we have seen. The politicians don't want to punish their own, and they don't want to persecute their own. When it comes to elections in this country and you see the role law enforcement officers have played, it's a very simple matter. Today, Dan Pare's name has come out. I remember in the 2024 election, how he was bastardized, that people said he should never send a SWAT team to the field because the politicians will not come to terms with their misbehavior and how the SWAT team is going to deal with them. Then we send the frontliners as a preventive action group to deal with elections and election security in this country. They did their very best, And we did not appreciate the police in that regard. When we are going for election, the police predominantly, or the security agencies predominantly, has a critical role to play in providing security protective cover for both the electorates and the electoral commission officers and almost everybody who has something to do with election. The politicians have a responsibility to discharge, and all of us who has a role to play in voting, together with the electoral commission, have some functions to undertake. I said, go back from 1992 or from the year 2000 and look at all the troubles we had with our election. It has always been the politicians who bastardized the process and create a problem for everybody. And yet nobody talks about the politician, how they get into areas they are not supposed to get into. And they bastardize the place and nobody gets them to answer for anything. And when all these things are done, we come back to the police and say the police have not acted. Alfred, if the police should come and set up a proactive, preventive structure approach we are talking about, it will make our elections very strict, and people are going to complain and say, why is the police not being friendly? And why is the police preventing people? And why is the police doing this? And why is the police doing that? And that is what I think that, yes, sometimes we stay very far away from the realities on the ground. I was at a Kumadoe and I was at Ayawaso West Wagon. And my heart breaks when we criticize the police in the manner we do. I understand they make mistakes and they may get certain aspects wrong. But when you have been a practitioner before and you realize that the police does the work and the politicians don't prosecute their own, your heart breaks. And that is where I come in strongly to say that, yeah, it's a shared responsibility. And all of us within the 3 cycle, Papa Police, do your job, or election security, do your job. Politicians, play by the rules and let the voters have a free chance of voting for their preferred candidates. And that is the way we want to go. Other than that, this violence is going to continue for a very long time until politicians come to terms or we start prosecuting them for the offenses they have committed in this country.
Right, and I'm going to come back to you as